Welcome to Ake Festival 2021 and welcome to this special conversation titled Love/Hate, which is a conversation with Nigerian writers on culture and identity. So my name is Anietie Adimora. I'm the Talent and Audience Development Manager at Harper Collins Publishers, and I'm also the co-editor of This Our Country. I'm holding it up now, which is a collection of personal essays from acclaimed and award-winning Nigerian writers. And it's also the foundation of today's conversation. So I'm looking forward to kind of taking a deep dive into the book and speaking with three incredible writers who are also contributors to this collection, and I will introduce them in turn. So to start, we have Anietie Isong. Anietie has worked as a writer for many brands in the UK and Nigeria. He is the author of Radio Sunrise and a collection titled Someone Like Me. His new novel is forthcoming from Jacaranda Books. Welcome, Anietie.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
Second, we have Umar Turaki. Umar is a writer and filmmaker from Jos, Nigeria. His debut novel, Such a Beautiful Thing to Behold, is forthcoming from Little A and Farafina in 2022. Welcome, Umar.
Thanks, Nancy.
And last but certainly not least, we have the delightful Oyinkan Akande. She is a Nigerian-born writer currently living in London. She works as a copywriter at Christie's and contributes on a freelance basis to several publications, including Wallpaper, Elephant Magazine, Gaudem, and Roundtable Journal. Welcome all. How are you feeling? So before we get started, we have an hour for this conversation. And I wanted to start obviously by asking you all questions. And I was very cheeky and requested each of you to kind of read each other's essays and come up with one question for each other. But before that, I wanted to kick off with just additional context of This Our Country, because I think it came about in a really interesting way. It started off as a conversation between myself and my Nigerian sister and colleague, Ore Abaje Williams. Shout out to Ore. And basically, we both work at HarperCollins in the UK, and we noticed that a lot of the books and the stories that we were seeing being acquired were written by Nigerian writers, but also a lot of the books that we were seeing kind of smashing the bestseller list were also written by Nigerian writers. So, whilst it definitely started with Nigeria to carry last and we we're just gassing each other up and talking about how incredible we were, it I think really quickly turned into a more serious conversation about how incredible it would be to get all these incredible writers together in one collection. So it started off as a conversation. We initially started with a list of about 60 writers, then we moved to 30 writers. And from those 30, we were really intentional about making it as rich and diverse as possible. So we were looking at everything from age to gender to ethnic background. But whilst we wanted different perspectives, we all wanted to anchor it to a single concept, just so the collection felt cohesive. So the brief was to write a personal essay that shares reflections of the Nigeria that you know, memories you have of Nigeria that are significant to you, and how you have experienced Nigeria, whether in the country itself or in the aspect of its culture and traditions found elsewhere in the world. So I will throw it to you, Anietie, first. How did you feel when you were presented with a brief, you were presented with the idea, and how did you eventually end up at the topic that you decided to write about?
Thank you, Nancy. How do I start? Actually, when I got the brief, I took some time off to really think about it because I'm not used to writing personalities. In fact, I've never really written one before. I'm a fiction writer, and that's what I've been doing all this while. So to write a personal essay was new to me. So I took some time, thought about it, and the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, maybe I can write about Nigerians in the Middle East because I've got connection, I've got links in the Middle East. So I started thinking, and then I realized, no, there's no hook. It wasn't coming. And I thought, okay, what else can I write? And I thought, because I work with a lot of Nigerian engineers, and I thought, okay, maybe I can write something about Nigerian engineers abroad and back home. And I started actually writing that, and it took me quite a while to write it, and I wasn't really feeling it. So when I finished the draft, and Nancy, you know what happened, and I wasn't really feeling it. I was like, no, I don't think this is appropriate for this collection. And I went back again to think what other topic I could do. And then one day I was just talking to one of my friends about what I went through when my dad passed and the burial. And he was like, oh my God, you had to go through all of that. And when we finished talking, that was when I had like a light bulb moment. I was like, okay, I think, why don't I write something about this? This is really personal. And that flowed very naturally. And it didn't take as much time as I'd spent on the previous version of the engineering one that I wrote. And I'm excited that Nancy and Ore liked it.
Yeah, excellent. And I kind of recall from your essay, you spoke a bit about, initially loving culture, but not necessarily liking customs. And then by the end of your essay, you got to a point where you saw the role of customs in preserving culture. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, because I always tell some of my friends, I don't even have, probably I have just 2 Nigerian traditional dresses, because I'm not really into culture like that. But I speak my language. I love my people. I love my music. I love the food. But I just didn't like those rules that they had in the village. Oh, you cannot do this. You have to do this. You have to follow. It didn't sit well with me at all. And when my dad was alive, I rarely visited the village. In fact, my dad even encouraged me to do so. So when he passed and I had to go through a lot of those requirements for the burial to take place, I became more interested. I was just amazed that they've got this custom that, okay, you cannot bury somebody on some particular days. You got to get permission from the village chief. Everything was done at the village level. We didn't have to go to the local government or anything for support. And I was just amazed that some of the rules that they had was not written down anywhere. I tried to explore as much as I could in that essay, but I'm not sure. There were a lot of things I wanted to write in there, but I just had to summarize this whole rite of passage into this few words.
Incredible, and we definitely enjoyed reading it, particularly because it taught us so much about that culture as well, which was great. Thank you so much. Umar, I'm going to pass the mic to you and ask the same question. So when we sent you the brief, what were your first thoughts and how did you decide to approach it?
I think so. For me, I would say that I think recently, probably around the time that I got the brief, that for better or worse, I kind of came to accept that, and the background to this is that I've been, even though my main activity as a writer has been around fiction, I've been fascinated with nonfiction and just essays and so around that time, I think I just came to terms with the possibility that my father may just be a sort of subject matter for me or a lens through which, I try to sort of engage with a lot of things using the personal essay. I think this was the second essay I wrote or I ever wrote. And of course, the first one was also a bit about my father, from a different perspective. And so when this came, I just felt where else to start, because the truth is everything I sort of, whatever sense of loyalty I have to Nigeria, like I felt like he kind of in a very premature way, he kind of just handed it over to me, right? So, and then I was also in a position where I had just become a father. And as I was thinking about it, I realized I was sort of sandwiched between generations. So that was essentially, and I can't say that, I was like, oh, I'm going to sort of start with my dad and then end with my daughter or whatever, but I just sort of knew that, okay, it's all sort of in the mix and let's just see what comes out. And that's what came out.
I absolutely loved it. And I think when we sent the brief to everyone, it was quite interesting to see what came back because everyone had the freedom to approach it however they wanted to approach it. But it was just fascinating how many people chose to write about fathers. A lot of people spoke about parents, but specifically fathers. And I found that fascinating. Do you think that has anything to do with people just associate? So, for example, I'm from Anambra State, and that's because my father's from Anambra State, my mum's from Imo State, right? So, what role does fatherhood play as it relates to identity? Do you think?
I think there's this saying where I can't remember where I came across it, where this idea that, a father is sort of your source of, I guess, clothes you with your identity or whatever, and your mother sort of clothes you with nurture and all of that, And of course, we can go into all kinds of debates about that duality, but I guess maybe just speaking for myself, like I said, I lost my dad when I was like 11 or 12, and again, it's in recent years that I'm really beginning to understand how deeply that affected me. And a big part of it was just in terms of the choices that I made as a person. And a big part of that is choosing to sort of be situated in Nigeria to try and associate myself as much as possible with Nigeria. Beyond that, I think there's also the general idea, which you kind of touched on, that in a sense, you are from where your father is, essentially. And even if there's a mix, and I kind of go a bit into that in the essay, and that has its own complications and issues, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. And another thing that I would say featured really heavily in your essay, which I absolutely loved, was just you were just talking about food, but you actually taking your time to really, I don't know, just paint these lavish pictures of like dishes. So, what link is there? And a lot of people actually spoke about food, and it went beyond the kind of traditional loaf rice and suya, but actually like really took it a deep dive into like culinary worlds of Nigeria. So what role do you think food plays as it relates to how we identify as Nigerians?
So many levels to it, right? Most obviously, food is, without food, we're going to die. So there's that bit. There's this essay I read recently, and it's about sort of craft. And the approach of it is that craft is essentially a set of values, and it sort of has cultural roots, And then the writer kind of goes on to extrapolate how certain kinds of craft have been placed on a pedestal above others, and that's why maybe you have certain cultures a bit more represented, for example, in publishing and all that. But my point is, when I was thinking about how do you make, so for example, you have certain soups or dishes or whatever that within more than one ethnic setting. And I was just thinking about, and everybody would kind of have their own preferred way of going about making it, but that is true to them, but it doesn't necessarily make it the only way to make it, right? And I just thought it's such an interesting, colorful way of just looking at things and looking at the country, looking at identity. And
yeah, I wish, Omar, sorry,
go for it.
I just, because you're talking about food, and when I read your essay, I was like, damn, I wish I had written a lot about our food too.
I can imagine. I think there was one way that you described yam. I have never seen yam described like that in my life. Okay. And I'm not even a fan of yam, but I would definitely dig into that, the way it was described. Another question that I'll quickly throw at you is what I found really interesting when you started to introduce the idea of your daughter, but also the idea that she is, this idea of being split between along, 3 different ethnic lines, which I found particularly interesting. And I don't know whether my question was more about when you see someone like your daughter and you say she is Nigerian, is that reductionist in any way? Does that take away from the intricate way that her identity is woven because of her parents?
Definitely not, and I think it really ties into the whole question of what it means to be a Nigerian, because there are just so many possibilities, and that's the beauty of it. We always talk about our unity in our diversity, and I think it's such a beautiful thing that two people from two different parts of the country can get together and create a human being who is also a Nigerian, and they have their own kind of particular texture, experience, or whatever of how they see the world. And I think for me, the only sort of, I guess, difficulty I would see with that is in the sense that maybe one side sort of tries to overshadow the other, right? Or one side is neglected, at the expense of the other. I don't think any one aspect of ourselves, of our background or whatever should be sacrificed. And it's all in service of being Nigerian.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I recall kind of on Twitter, like when we shared all the essays with each other, somebody specifically was talking about how sad she felt that we weren't able to explore the country, right? So there are some things in your essay that people who have born and raised in Nigeria have never encountered. And I think it just speaks to the diversity, but also we know so little of ourselves as it relates to, the different cultures and identities and customs and religions that exist within this country that we call Nigeria. So I found that really a really powerful aspect of your essay, I would say. So Oyinkan, over to you. I guess before I kind of throw the exact same question to you, I just wanted to kind of say that you actually joined the project in a very special way, in a very VIP way, I would say, in that as part of this whole project, we essentially wanted to identify writers that we wanted to be a part of the collection, but we also had a space where we wanted to find an unagented writer of Nigerian heritage anywhere in the world to respond to the exact same brief and to submit to us, and we would select a winner. And we are absolutely privileged to be in the presence of the winner, who will now kind of speak and respond to the same question as it relates to what did you think about when you saw the brief, but specifically when you saw it as part of a broader competition? What made you want to put yourself forward? And crucially, what made you want to write the essay that you wrote?
So yeah, I came to this, yes, as probably the only non-published writer. And at the time, I actually just told my uncle that I was working on a novel. So it was kind of under that. I was kind of exploring the idea of writing, and I told him about it. So he sent it to me. He stumbled on it, sent it to me in January. And so when I received the brief, I was actually in Lagos. I was there. I spent 3 months there, which is the longest time I'd been in Lagos in probably 10 years, more than that. But I got there in November, which was in the aftermath of the Tollgate massacre. And I kind of got to Lagos with a very different feeling than I last left it, I guess. There was a curfew. I could see some of the, burnt buildings and the looted buildings. And I felt the energy of Lagos wasn't exactly what I remembered growing up or from the last time I'd been there. As we were nearing December, the energy of Lagos kind of came back and felt really like revitalized. And for me, going home a lot feels like very replenishing. So when I got the brief, I really, really wanted to write something that felt true to that energy more than that sense that we were being in the news for protest and disorder. And so I really wanted to speak about the joy and the folly of Lagos that I remember, but also about how a lot of that joy comes from hardship as well. So I wanted to explore the relationship between those two things.
Absolutely. I loved it. I absolutely loved reading your essay. I remember when it came in, and there was a part where you talked about the culture of Bedu, and I know I have ruined it as an Igbo woman. I have ruined the Yoruba word. Can you say the word properly just for the purpose of this conversation?
I mean, I don't have the best accent either, but Bedu.
Okay, fine, perfect. And I remember when I read it, and I just felt it in my body, and I had to play Burna Boy's song, and I had to just have it in the background as I was reading your essay, because for me, I think it's a really interesting one. When you a particular season. So the call to all these writers came around the time when EndSARS was, trending on Twitter. And I guess I would say the feeling amongst the writers that we were approaching was a very similar feeling of, it's basically the title of this conversation, this love and hate, and this kind of, you love the culture, but there's something about it that you feel let down by, essentially. And reading your essay, I just felt excited. I felt it boosted my mood in a way that I feel would work. We both felt would work really well with the rest of the essays. So I guess the question is, in a season where a lot was going on, why did you want to focus on enjoyment? Why did you want to focus on the joyful aspects of Nigeria as you know it?
I guess, to be honest, the answer for that is quite simple. That was literally what was going on. It was, I think I would have seen it in January. Maybe we were just about to calm down after Christmas and New Year's. But yeah, it was genuinely to remember the sense of joy also that Nigeria has. I think a little bit, it was like an understanding for me at that point that for me and my experience of Nigeria and my experience of Lagos, those two things have always been together. So one of the things that I kind of talk about is Nigerians almost seem to party harder for how much stress and hardship that they go through. And that's what it really felt like. I got to Lagos while there was still quite a strict curfew going on. And as soon as the curfew was lifted, it was as if there never was one.
Business,
it was a completely different place. And I really like that energy. And I tried my best to kind of communicate just how extreme we can be. We can be curfew and kind of despondent, and then in the season of enjoyment in the next day.
No, I loved it so much. Like, honestly, Burna Boy is a soundtrack whenever I read your essay. I genuinely enjoyed it. And what the fun thing was, when it was announced that you were the winner, I had email after email of different agents who were like, oh my gosh, she's incredible. Let's kind of get her details. I just love the energy, and I love that we were able to have this as part of the collection. I guess another question I have for you is, it's interesting, similar to Anietie actually, in terms of, these ceremonies or these occasions being the entry point to the culture as we know it. Is that something you were conscious of when you were writing your essay as it related to a lot of what it means to be Nigerian is rooted in how we celebrate, how we mourn, how we have occasions, would you say?
Yeah, so I think those kinds of things, those kind of cultural, ritualistic kind of practices that we have that, are embedded, it kind of cements what it means, what our cultural identities are. So whereas I don't think that those things necessarily hold our culture, but they're reminders. They're almost like the moments where you actually realize that the thing that you've been doing or the way that you've been thinking actually is dressed up in something. So it's more the way that we remember, it's more the way that we embed. Yeah, so a little bit, if I was to say that memory of the wedding in my essay, for example, is probably not the first time that I've seen that my family is crazy, but it was the first time that it stuck in my mind that way because of the way that they were going about this wedding. So it's more about when things come to the surface and really become moments that we remember. And so, yeah, I think they're important because they mean that we actually remove ourselves from our everyday and notice, but they're not the only thing that makes up culture to me anyway.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think, what I was getting at is this idea of even when we think about, respecting elders being a part of our culture, I think that is reflected in so many cultures across the world. But when you think about something like marriage, marrying someone, the ceremony looking a specific way, a certain way, I think is unique to specific cultures or different ethnicities. So I found that particularly interesting. But yeah, thank you all for your answers. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is more about process of writing these essays. So you're all fiction writers, you've all previously written fiction, and you all alluded to the fact that, in terms of essays, it might not necessarily be your go-to medium as it relates to writing. So how did you find the process of actually not focusing on characters that are far away, but actually seeing yourself as a central character? How was that process? And I'll start with Anietie again.
Hi, okay, thanks, Nancy. When I was writing this, I kept thinking, I've got to write it in such a way that I don't offend anyone in my family. This is, my father was a well-respected man in the community, in the village. And I thought, there were so many things I wanted to write, but I'm like, I'm not sure my sisters or my uncles or my aunts would like that. But it was all real. It was all, it wasn't fiction, not something I was used to. But I had to borrow some of my techniques in creative writing, like dialogue. I think the first draft I wrote, it was just, straight narration. And then I went back and I thought, oh man, who says I can't have dialogue in this essay? So I went back, like the place where I was talking to my uncles about the need to write down our customs so people can actually document these things. And the response I thought was better put in a dialogue. So I did that. And a few other places where I brought dialogue in and a bit of metaphor here and there. And in the end, really, I have to say, it's really made me want to write more personal essays. I know it's in vogue at the moment. A lot of memoirs and several Nigerian and African authors are all coming out with non-fiction books, and I see why, because it's very fulfilling writing about something. For me, my father was always there for me, and to lose him that way, and because the way he died, and I wasn't even around when he died. I was abroad, and they called me. I was really, really sad that I wasn't there. So to be able to put those emotions, and also not make it sound like these customs are really terrible. To be honest, I was very worried. I heard all sorts of things about burials in the village, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go through all of this. But in the end, it turned out that they were really lovely people. They just wanted my family to give proper respect to my father.
Yeah.
And
That's great. And I think it's really interesting what you say as it relates to, I think we come from a culture where it's kind of what happens in a home stays in a home. You don't go on the streets and you start talking about what happened. So I think it's very interesting to see how that lends itself to personal essays, which is actually at the heart of it. It's about vulnerability, but also just exposing yourself. And I think it's a very kind of, interesting thing for us to do more of kind of as Nigerian. But Umar, pass the mic to you again. What was the process like as it relates to moving away from fiction to a more personal essay?
There's this saying by this Congolese filmmaker, Joe Munga. I read it many, many years ago, but I'll try and paraphrase, and essentially he was talking about the merits of fiction or documentary, speaking about film now, about documentary versus drama, and he said something about how the best sort of drama or fiction films try to borrow the realism of a documentary, and the best documentaries kind of try to take like from just the narrative, like, thrust and things like that of fiction. I thought it was an interesting thing. And so just sort of back to the question of this whole, with my background in fiction, I think that I've always been fascinated with the ways in which you can take those elements of fiction and transfer them into the essay, or, work in a nonfiction mode. And especially because the essay is something that is so, in a way, it's about contemplation. It's about just thinking through things, trying to sort of open things, dissecting, and some very striking essays I read, and you would sort of look at them, and there's just this way in which, and it's a very deft thing, because they're telling you a story and it's something that really happened, but then they're also sort of dropping these amazing insights while they're going, along the way. And they're not like, they don't have like 2 pages of just, what do you call it, introspection. There's a way it's all kind of woven in together that I really, really admire. So I think I tried. I think
you succeeded, I would say. And Oyin, over to you. How did you find it, the personal essay aspects?
I actually found it less difficult, I thought, because I think when I write fiction, I'm constantly borrowing from my own reality and my own experiences anyway. And here, rather than making sure, I'm shoring up the plot, I'm, making tangible connections with the characters, I just kind of said what I remembered. And then it started a lot of conversations, because I remembered quite a bit, but started a lot of conversations with my mom and my grandmother about how they actually remembered it, because they were obviously much older than I was. And so then I really enjoyed their recollection of it and how much they enjoyed retelling it to me. So it was a lot more direct. I enjoyed it actually a lot. And I felt more just like I depended on my memory. And the one thing that I think I had to think about is I was enjoying the writing process so much, and I was enjoying remembering some of these parts of my family's history, and also the wider idea of enjoyment in Lagos. And I really wanted to communicate that to anyone who read it, not just regardless of whether they're Nigerian or not, that they understand this kind of energy.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, the point about fiction writers having to borrow from fiction, I feel like that 100% potentially gives you guys an edge as it relates to what we want from a personal essay that is different from for example, an academic essay. And just the ability to, as you say, Umar, just like drop like little nuggets of, detail, which if you just read it, it looks small, but actually when you think about the whole essay, it's just such a beautiful contribution to that narrative. So I would say you guys all succeeded in moving between fiction to personal essays. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of like reoccurring themes. So when Ori and I were deciding the ordering, we wanted people to almost read the essays as you would listen to an album for the first time, in order. Everything was absolutely intentional. So if one person mentioned the word suya, we would like put it next to another essay which had suya, so it felt like a kind of constant theme or constant journey through Nigeria through the different essays. Different things came up to us. So we saw a lot about fatherhood, like I alluded to earlier. We saw a lot about food. We saw a lot about kind of this contradiction. So I think one of the authors mentioned, pride and punishment as it related to their relationship with Nigeria. So, as people who read the collection, like what kind of key themes stood out to you between the different essays you read? Was there something that was jumping out at you? And anyone can jump in.
Yeah, okay, I can just jump in. I think for me, like you said, it was a theme of family, especially fatherhood. Renaissance essay was one of the first I read, because I know her. So I was like,
so it means, sorry, does that mean that you didn't read it in order like an album?
No, I didn't.
Oh my God, I am so stressed right now.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay,
No,
continue. I'll
I
leave
did
you
not.
alone.
So I
I'll
just
bully
read
you
it.
off camera.
So
Go for it.
I actually tweeted at her. I was like, "Oh my God, I enjoyed reading, how you wrote about your father. I know I could just feel it. When you've got that connection with your family and you're able to express it, and all the people who have similar connections can actually really feel it. So I saw that through. And then the other thing again was reference to Lagos. I found that a lot of these
Yeah.
essays, all I did mention Lagos somewhere
Yeah.
in my, and then I remember reading Helen Habila's work about traveling from the north to Lagos, and it was so
Fascinating.
yeah, it was so
Yeah.
fascinating. So for me, family and place, it just stood out for me.
That's great. Umar?
I think for me, probably summarized in the word contradictions. I think there's an essay actually that just carries the title and that sort of dives into that and examines it. But I think the most striking thing that seemed to follow almost every essay was this celebration of who we are and our resources and our talent as a people. And at the same time, this source of grief and mourning of all the things that we have not been able to accomplish with all of these things. It's in the way we are joyful, right? Even though we don't necessarily have much to be joyful about. Yeah, I think Oyinkan's essay kind of delves into that, and even this whole idea about joy and celebration being, in service of hope, because you're always sort of trying to stare down whatever it is, whether it's corruption, whether it's police brutality, just whatever it is that the realities, of Nigeria continues to, whatever realities that, continues to just surround Nigerians. But yeah, I think that was a big thing. And you can just see the effort to try and hold those two things together, and they just won't sort of fuse.
That Oyinkan?
For me, it was quite two things, I think. First one being nostalgia. I was quite struck by how many people were children at some point in their essays.
Wow.
That idea that tracing, so, I thought maybe it's just the nature of the brief, but tracing this idea of your cultural identity or all these people thinking about Nigeria and what it means to them. And a lot of them, the spark moment was when they were quite young. And so it's this idea that it solidifies quite early, whether you know it or not. And so when you're thinking about it quite actively, you return back to what feels like the origin. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the color and the way that things were described, and from food to language and the different kinds of languages, and to weddings and funerals, the national anthem, all the different ways. Those markers of cultural identity was really interesting to me. But then the other thing was kind of dissonance, which is kind of similar to what Umar said about contradiction. In your essay, that was one of the other ways that I think you put it very, exactly how it resonated with me. You said, but if all was well and beautiful and lovely, I suspect that dissatisfaction would still be there. And this was just looking at this idea that when you're there, you want to leave, and when you're elsewhere, I feel that all the time. 3 months is just a little too long in Lagos, but 2 months would have been perfect.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I completely see that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass it over to you. So this is the part where each of you ask a question to your fellow contributor. So just to kind of follow the pattern we've been going in, Anietie, do you want to go first and ask your question?
Yeah, okay. Hi, Umar. I really enjoyed reading your essay. In fact, I think I read it more than twice. I like to see fathers being celebrated, and a lot of things stood out for me. We talked about food, we talked about language, but I like the description of other things like the car. You talked about the Peugeot 504. I'm like, oh yeah, my dad also had that, that car. And I have this picture. I actually went to look at it. I have this picture of me and my younger sister. We posed beside my dad's car. We're both in primary school then. And, it's reading your essay just brought back those memories for me. But the question I want to ask is, I know you're from your biography says you were born in Jos. Oh, sorry, your Plateau State. Sorry, let me not assume it's Jos.
It is Jos, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember in the office, I had this boss. He's not even Nigerian. He's a white guy. He was born in Jos and he speaks fluent Hausa. So I know you talked about Nupe, Ngas, and Hausa specifically as some of the languages that you speak. I just wanted to find out more. Would you say that Hausa is the most prominent language in Jos?
So Hausa it's a curious language in the sense that it has become like the lingua franca, of northern Nigeria. Historically, it was what essentially was the connector, especially when you had different tribes trading and things like that. And of course, even traditionally, the Hausa man, he was quite itinerant. So a lot of traders were Hausa people who moved around essentially. So the language really just spread. And actually, when you go to different parts of the North, you will find different, I hesitate to call it dialect, right? But in a way, it is different dialects of Hausa.
Yeah.
And there's a certain kind of Hausa in Jos, that, and so you see different geographic locations sort of taking ownership of this language and putting their own little spin on it. You've got the Jos Hausa. When you look at even like the Orthodox Church in the North, and you have specifically somewhere like Jos, the Hausa that is spoken within, those churches or within those walls, when you go for like a Hausa service, it has its own particular flavor, So to answer your question, it's very predominant. It's most likely in my generation, it's safe to say that if someone says they speak two languages, most likely it's going to be English and Hausa.
Okay, why I was asking, sorry, before you, was where I come from in Akwa Ibom, we have lots of languages. We've got Ibibio, Anang, Eket, Oron, I think at least 5 that I know of, but I can only speak 2. And there's this, so I was just fascinated to know how this plays out in other states, especially up north in Nigeria.
Yeah, it's quite similar.
I think it just speaks, me jumping in again when I said I was going to be quiet, but it just speaks to, we all we all represent different parts of Nigeria, everyone on this call, and the idea that there's so much that we can each learn from each other as it relates to what we mean when we talk about Nigeria. So I thought that was a really refreshing question and answer. Umar, back to you.
All right. So actually, my question for Oyinkan kind of also follows follows a theme of language. And before I sort of go into that, one of the things that resonated with me was that, you were talking about specific wedding, among Yoruba people and sort of the general Yoruba culture. But it really struck me how true it is across Nigeria, because what you were talking about, how the wedding really is, people, I mean, when I got married 3 years ago, people kept telling me, look, forget it. It's not your wedding. This is your mother's wedding, or this is your, my wife, people would tell my wife, this is your parents' wedding. Ultimately, it ended up just being much, much bigger than, personally would have wanted. And I think wherever you go in Nigeria, it's true that this desire to sort of do things in a larger than life way, But anyway, my curiosity was actually around the title of your essay, Elephants and Giraffes. And the reason is because I'm assisting a professor in this course that it's analyzing metaphor. And he's just looking at metaphor and just how metaphor is a part of language and a part of thinking. And in fact, it's a part of being human. Like, that's the long and short of it. But so I'm seeing metaphors everywhere. And so when I saw this, elephant and giraffe, I was just curious about whether it was something your grandmother said in English or whether she said it in Yoruba. And if it was in Yoruba, is there like a root? I'm just curious.
So my grandmother does say it in English, and I think she actually got it from when she lived outside of Nigeria and first of all realized that it doesn't rain the way it rains in Nigeria everywhere else. And so she started to realize the saying cats and dog doesn't apply to Nigeria. So she had to come up with one that made sense. And
Right,
for
right.
me, it was just a great example of how Nigerians don't do weddings like in half measure. We do them extra. You have to find a new way of describing the level of extra that we do.
That's incredible. I love
I
that
love,
so
I
much.
love that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Oyinkan, your turn.
Yes. So I was actually, and just on that, actually thinking about how weddings are true across probably all of Nigeria. I didn't know about every different culture. What I actually found really interesting in your essay, Anietie, is that you talk about how family is also so much involved in funerals as well. At the time I'd write, I had never been to a funeral. I'd never been to a Nigerian funeral of any kind. So for me, the experience was mostly through weddings and how much everyone kind of comes together, chips in and bands together. And I found it really interesting that, you said how there's a big fanfare around telling your mother's side of the family as well. And there's this kind of sense of respect and asking them to be involved and then wanting to be involved. Something I really appreciate about Nigerian culture. Actually, so one of those things, I really enjoyed your apprehensiveness around kind of these traditional rites and customs, and also your journey in kind of appreciating them. But I also wondered, this is actually something I like asking people in general, but with you, I really wanted to ask you, what is it that you celebrate the most about your culture? And what is it that maybe takes you back home, regardless of whether you are, it makes you feel like you're home?
Maybe I'll just say food. I would like to believe that we have the best food in Nigeria.
That's political, man. Come on.
You know,
This will turn into a debate.
Right?
this is not jollof rice war, you know. But we've got, like, maybe I should have explored it a little bit when I talked about the food, the kind of food we served, because we have some delicacies that are actually quite popular in Nigeria, but it originates from that Akwa Ibom cross-river axis, and one of them is afang soup. If you've never tried it, someday you should. There's afang, there's the dikai kong thing, and whenever I eat, or I can cook it. So whenever I cook it, wherever in the world I am, I just sit down and I just remember how my mom and my aunties and even my dad used to prepare it back home, and it's just very nostalgic for me. And so I think for me, food is number one, and then our music. I love the music so much, and thank God for YouTube. I just sometimes spend hours, musicians I don't know of. I just browse through YouTube looking for Akwa Ibom songs and just kind of trying to connect with home.
No, I love it. That sounds incredible. And I think, even the link to music is a really interesting one. A part of this kind of campaign was asking you each to pick a song that reminds you of your Nigeria, which Umar, particularly, you had some struggles with, but you said it to us in the end. But I think that it just speaks to the fact that music is so central to who we are as Nigerians. So I think that's an interesting one. Food and music, great. Brings me on to my final question. So a couple of years ago, I'll say maybe like 5 years ago, actually, I came across a quote by Aminatou Fauna, and it said, "If you want to know a country, read its writers." And for me, that just stuck in my spirit. And I'm so happy that we were able to kind of reuse it when it comes to this particular project, because I think if you do want to know Nigeria, read its writers. So I guess the question is, what did a collection teach you about Nigeria? And that could be either from writing your essays or reading the essays of your colleagues. So Umar, I'll start with you.
Like I told you, Nancy, before now, I think this is such a beautiful, essential collection, just because of how varied it is and how rich and colorful, from just so many levels, even from like a creative angle, you look at how each writer sort of approached their essay, it was just such a joy to read. A couple of things I'll name real quickly. One was reading Hafsa Zayan's essay, and where she spoke about, I can't remember if it was her Pakistani Nigerian grandmother, one of her grandparents, I think.
Grandfather.
Grandfather, that's right. And just seeing that, because you're used to seeing African American, you're used to seeing Nigerian American, but just sort of this specific qualification of Nigeria and, this hyphenated way, it felt really interesting to me. And when we think about the Nigerian identity, we always limit it to, or we think mostly in terms of, oh, the person is Igbo, the person is this, the person is that. But you have people that came over and set up their lives. You have in Jos, for example, there's like a whole Lebanese community.
Like fifth generation.
Exactly. And these are Nigerians because many of them were born there, they grew up there, and it was just interesting for me to sort of see that and to recognize it, to accept it, And the other thing that really, really struck me, and I think that came out in some of the essays that we're looking at, the war and the aftermath of the war. Particularly, I think it was Ike Anya's essay where he spoke about, let me just read 2 sentences. So it says, decades on, I reflect on my idyllic childhood, middle child of educated middle-class parents in Nigeria's oil boom years, the 1970s. Reflecting, I muse on what unseen pain and trauma from the war hovered behind those sunlit days spent playing in the garden of the bungalow at Odim. How did my parents, their colleagues, and friends create this haven, close-knit university community out of nothing? I thought it was such a powerful way of really concretizing this sense that there is an ethnic group, right, that went through what they went through and came out of it and found a way to rebuild. And, I just never seen it captured in such a personal way. And it really, really struck me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That gave me goosebumps. I can't lie. Not you giving me goosebumps. That's not the plan. But yeah, I love it. And Oyinkan, over to you. So the question is, in terms of like, what did you learn? What did it teach you about Nigeria?
So for me, actually, this was a difficult question to answer because I wanted to pick one thing, but I really felt like with every essay, I learned something new. And sometimes I try and explain Nigeria to my friends who aren't Nigerian or haven't been. And it's impossible to like capture the color because I only have one perspective and one culture and one language, which I don't even speak very well. And I've never been able to, give anything that feels satisfactory. So reading it should probably have made me feel really ignorant, but actually I felt really proud that I'm learning some of these things about people and cultures now. And at the same time, it felt like really nice to find out that there's so much more to celebrate than I already am aware of. And I think it's the kind of thing as like Nigerian culture becomes more mainstream in Western culture. This felt really nice to have something that isn't just a song or isn't just, there's no real snapshot. So this felt really quite broad. And I learned something from every story and from every experience. And it made me feel like if we had even more writers, we'd have even more experiences that were diverse and colorful, which is amazing.
Excellent. I love the answer. Anietie?
Oh yeah. Just to support what Oyinkan has just said. For me, it was just the diversity that came out very strongly from the contributors themselves, the kind of stories that they wrote about, and also to show how vibrant Nigeria is,
Absolutely.
And in terms of size, the geography of Nigeria, reading Helen Habila's work about traveling from the north, I think it was Bauchi, said he was traveling by train. How many days to Lagos? I was like, oh, wow, And that was many years ago. When people talking about trend lines now in Lagos, I'm like, yeah, but reading his essay, I just realized we had this thing working many, many years ago. And it's an amazing country with amazing people. And I really loved the collections and the contributors too.
I love that. Amazing country with amazing people. What a wonderful place to end this conversation. Thank you all so much. And I think, one thing that I would say is when we set out to work on this collection, it was 100% for us, by us, the idea that we wanted to be in conversation with ourselves. If somebody who isn't Nigerian picks up the book and we want them to pick up the book, of course we want them to walk away thinking it was a rich and vibrant collection, but crucially we want it to start conversations amongst us as Nigerians, and hopefully it helps us to learn more about the country and our relationship with the country as well. So thank you all so much. I've loved speaking to you all. I think it was really rewarding for me to kind of hear all your contributions. So I'll just hold up the book of This Our Country. Is out on the 30th of September. in Nigeria and the UK, and I can't wait for everyone to read it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Omar and Oyinkan. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you guys.
Same here.
Yeah.
That 5 minutes madness only you can understand. Visit myspectre.com to get your Spectre experience. Spectre, loans in 5 minutes.